Saints Catholic High in Sheffield at lunchtime.
I simply speak to the individuals affected, to the family in particular, but everybody impacted by this awful situation. A young boy has gone to school and hasn't returned home, and so my first thoughts as Prime Minister and as a father are with the family.
The school was put into lockdown for the second time in a week following reports of violent behaviour last Wednesday. Planned trade tariffs between Mexico and the United States are on hold for a month. President Trump says it's after his neighbour agreed to send 10,000 soldiers to its northern border to stem the flow of illegal drugs. Former British Army soldier Daniel Khalif has been jailed for more than 14 years for spying for Iran and escaping prison. In November, a jury found he breached the official secrets and terrorism acts. There's been criticism of new proposals for assessing schools in England which replace single-word judgments. Ofsted says a new colour-coded report card system is fairer, but the National Education Union's warning it will make things worse. In the city, the FTSE 100's closed down 90 points at 85.84. The pound buys $1.23 and €1.20. LBC weather: rain for Northern Ireland and Western Wales tonight, dry in the south and east, and a low of 3 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello and welcome to Monday's Cross Question with me, Iain Dale. On the panel with me tonight, we have Dan Tomlinson, the Labour MP for Chipping Barnet. We have Christopher Howarth, former advisor to Dame Priti Patel when she was Home Secretary, also former Conservative election candidate, and he's the author of the political thriller novel The Durian Pact, When Two Worlds Go to War. We'll find out a little bit about that later. Imarn Ayton is an anti-racism activist and writer, and Albie Amankona is Chief Executive and co-founder of the campaign group Conservatives Against Racism for Equality. Now, he's the only one to have done the programme before, so he knows the drill. We've got 3 debutantes tonight. What can possibly go wrong? Well, what could possibly go wrong is if nobody asks the question. The number to call, 0345 6060 973, is the number. You can WhatsApp on that number. You can text 84850. And, of course, you can watch us on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Well, let's go to our first caller. It's David in Enfield. David, hello. What would you like to ask?
Good evening, everyone. Can the UK government trust Trump to honour any future free trade deal?
Albie, seeing as you're an old hand at this, you can go first.
Yes, I think we can, because, of course, once we've signed a trade deal with the US, that's a legally binding document, and you would hope that if we did manage to come to some sort of agreement with the US, it would be in both our interests and also in the US's interests. So it wouldn't be in Donald Trump's interest to go back on any trade deal that he'd signed with us. What would be the point in signing a trade deal with us?
Do you think it's possible to sign a trade deal with America that is actually advantageous to this country? Because wouldn't he want to, part of the trade deal would surely mean flooding the UK market with American agricultural products?
I personally don't have a problem with the UK having access to American agricultural products, pharmaceutical products, you name it. I don't have a problem with it. No one is forcing consumers to buy those products in the supermarkets. One of the big prizes of Brexit is, in fact, being able to sign a trade deal with the US. I think it was very disappointing that that wasn't something the last Conservative government was able to do. And I'm hopeful that this Labour government will be able to do what the Tories weren't.
Dan, are you hopeful?
I think, well, to start with, we've seen, I think people were quite sceptical that this Labour government would be able to form a good working relationship with the now, I was going to say incoming, but with the new government in America. But I thought this question might come up this evening. So I did look for exactly what President Trump has said about Keir. And he said he's a Liberal, which is a bit different from me, fair enough. But I think he's a very good person, and I think he's done a very good job thus far. So far, I think things are quite positive. Being able to work together constructively. Well. Yeah, maybe there is a benefit there in us being able to be a small, independent country that the president actually is quite fond of. I think he likes coming over.
He is half British, isn't he? Let's remember that.
Likes the monarchy as well, and also there's the substantive point that our countries are very intertwined, both when it comes to security, defence, but also our economies, billions of pounds of trade going each way, and so I think that we can trust America. And I'm confident that we'll be able to have a good working relationship with Donald Trump too.
But how important is it for Keir Starmer to negotiate a free trade deal with America?
I think we have to make sure that we are pursuing good and sensible trade policies with all of our peer countries. I think that we have said in our manifesto, and so that's what we were elected on, so that's what we'll focus on as a number one priority, is making sure we can improve that trading relationship with the EU. There are some specific things that we said we wanted to work on. They're our nearest trading partner. We trade more with them than anyone else. But of course, where we can make progress towards improving our trading relationship with America, that's a good thing too. I just think we should be realistic that the bang for buck there will be smaller than improving things with our nearest trading partner.
So if we had to choose between the two, you'd go for the EU?
I would try and dodge that question, Ian, and say it's probably better.
I like him already.
It is probably better to try and make sure that we can take advantage of our geographical position and our position in terms of the fact that we do relate very closely with the EU and with the US to get the best of both worlds. That is the sensible position to take,
so
given where we are.
essentially, you're copying Boris Johnson and you believe in cakeism.
Well, I wish there was some cake this evening. I've got a lovely tea, though, so thank you for the tea.
Imarn Ayton. Now, the question was, can the UK government trust Trump to honour any free trade deal?
No. So even though I agree with Albie and I agree with Dan, no, because he's a very strong leader and he understands that him and his country and his people and their interests come first before anyone else, before their alliances.
That's the same as any
but he's very good at it. You're right. I totally agree, Ian. But he's very good at it. He makes sure that that's the number one. So it's not 1 and 2 kind of interchangeable. No, number one is America. And if we don't necessarily play ball with our neighbours, if we don't capitulate, humble ourselves as the Brits for the new king in charge, well, we will probably find ourselves...
Do you think that's what it will come down to?
Yes, I do. We are at a disadvantage. This is all about power. Trump has power. He knows it. And I actually think, just to add to your point, Dan, I actually think that he was setting up the play. If we just think about it strategically, I actually think he was trying to be nice when he gave the compliment to Keir Starmer in terms of being a nice person and doing good at his job. I think he knows he's going to mess us up later on. But his get-out-jail card, well, I've shown you as the Brits that I care about how you feel and your ideology, so surely you should share that or repay that same courtesy to me as an American president. And I think that's because he's setting up the play. He knows he's going to eat us alive, eat all of us alive. That is his plan, Dan.
About our prospects to continue to work well and prosper when it comes to that relationship between the US and the UK. They're one of our most vital allies in the whole world. Yes. And I think Donald Trump understands that, and I know that this government understands that too. So I think we can be a bit more optimistic than that.
Christopher.
Well, deals only work if there's something in it for both sides. But uniquely for the UK, we actually have a goods deficit with the Americans. So we buy more from them in goods.
Well, not according to Donald Trump today. I mean, he's wrong, but he thinks it's the other way around.
Well, we sell quite a lot of services, which isn't within the bounds of tariffs, which is his sort of favourite topic at the moment. But as we buy a lot from them, there is a benefit for both sides to have a deal, because he would like us to buy more from him, and we would want to sell more in, say, financial services. So there is a deal to be done there. We have a deal with the European Union, which is the most advantageous deal that the EU has struck with anyone. So the more upside there is with the US. It's not an either or. We have a deal with the EU. We don't have one with the US. Getting one with the US, that's where the most upside is.
But if there was a trade deal, could we, as the questioner asked, could we trust Donald Trump to implement it and stick to it?
As long as it continues to be in his interests and the US interests, which I think it would be, yes. I mean, we're a close ally of his. I mean, he seems to have some issues with Mexico and Canada.
And Greenland.
And a number of other countries around the world. But
Panama,
I don't think we're actually in that category. And I think a lot of what he says, there's a lot of bluster, which isn't actually the what he actually intends to do at the end of the day.
Let's take a follow-up text question from Scott in West Hampstead. He says, is Donald Trump risking an international trade war, or is he mainly using the threat of tariffs as a form of leverage to get other things which he wants from different countries? And how should the British government and the EU respond? Now, the 10% tariff, which was due to be imposed on Mexican goods, has been delayed for a month after the Mexican government agreed to move 10,000 soldiers to its border with the US. Last week, the Colombian government agreed to let a flight of people being deported from the US land in Bogota, having initially refused to do so until Trump threatened to impose a 25% tariff on Colombian products being sent to America. So is there a risk of an international trade war here, Dan, do you think? Because if there is, that would have calamitous effects on the world economy.
I don't think there is a risk of a big international trade war. Clearly, Donald Trump knows how to negotiate. We've seen him do that in the past, and I think there's be something in what your question is saying in terms of there'll be other things that he wants if other countries want the tariffs to be reduced. I hope that this stays contained. But to your point, Ian, there's definitely a knock-on effect of, that saying, if America sneezes, we catch a cold. And our economies are really meshed together in terms of trade, and we should be cautious about that. And I think that's why, we might talk about this a bit later, but why this focus of this government on growing our economy, doing the things we need to do to get our house in order.
How's that going?
So we can be more resilient to the shocks that come. Because time and time again, this country has faced shocks, but we haven't been prepared for them. And so that's why I think we've got this right focus to be looking at what we can do to turn things around.
How do you prepare for this, though? Because it is a possibility. So presumably there are civil servants beavering away, wargaming what Donald Trump could do.
Yeah, and I think in the long term, what we want to do as a country is make sure that we improve our supply side. That's a term that us economists will use, but it means that can we have in this country more capacity, more infrastructure, so that our firms can be more productive and that we can pay people more? We haven't built enough in this country for too long. We're focusing on what we can do to get things built again in this country so we can have more growth without having higher prices. And of course, the risk of a trade war is higher prices. So I think there's some long-term benefits to this approach too, to make us more resilient in the face of future shocks.
Albie?
It utterly depresses me as a free marketeer that believes in free trade that we're talking about trade wars. I think it is utterly depressing that we're talking about tariffs, we're talking about trade wars, we're talking about trade barriers. We know that tariff-free trade brings prosperity. We know that free trade brings prosperity and economic growth. And we have an American president who calls himself a conservative, a businessman, someone who believes in the free market, putting up all of these tariff barriers, destroying supply chains across North America, potentially threatening tariffs on the European Union, which actually is quite a protectionist institution. If the EU becomes less protectionist, then that would be a good thing. But ultimately, we seem to be moving further away from the type of global economy that I would like to see, one based on free trade, one based on international cooperation between liberal democracies, and more towards something where America, Europe, China, Russia, India, Iran, all more isolationist, and that concerns me.
OK, Christopher.
Well, I think we saw it the last time that Trump was president, that he goes into negotiations with his own style. He goes and he's threatened to annex Greenland. But underlying all of these things, there are serious points which are much smaller aims for him. So I think his nature is to go in big and then secure the actual thing that he wants. So in Greenland, it's security in case the Chinese invest in Greenland. In Panama, it was the operation of the canal. He wasn't going to invade Panama. I think the same maybe with Mexico. He had genuine issues about cross-border drug trafficking. And I think the UK, I think we can stay out of this one because we are not a problem as far as he's concerned because we buy their goods. So I think the downside for the UK is minimal. If we manage to move out of this and secure a free trade agreement with America, there's a big upside to this. And I wish the government well in trying to do that. It's in everyone's interest to have a good relationship with Trump and to try and move through these things and secure a trade agreement. So move on, one other thing, you said, economic growth. comes domestically in the end. You only trade abroad if you actually make the goods that people want abroad, and that it starts having a good domestic economy, good domestic regulation. Sort that out, and the trade follows. But trade agreements, very good.
Imarn, I suspect you might be a little bit more cynical.
Right on you. Yeah, okay, all right. But I will say, I might surprise you, I will say that I don't actually think that you're half right. I think that there won't be a trade war because I think most people will capitulate, or rather, most countries will capitulate because I think they realise, like I said, kind of reiterating the point that I made earlier, he is the one currently that holds the most power. Hence, I can tell by the way that you've all framed your sentences, and we refer to Trump and the US as king, and we are their kind of secondary, we're their kind of deputy, we're their kind of best friend that we hope that the big popular guy looks after. So I don't think there'll be a trade war because I think most people will capitulate. And it's only if we don't capitulate where we might be able to find a better balance in terms of kind of global
capitulating
dynamics.
would effectively mean lowering our tariff barriers to America.
Yes.
Which, Albie, you would think would be a good thing.
Yes, I think that would be a wonderful thing. I always think lowering tariff barriers are a good thing. Whenever we Brits have this conversation about things like chlorinated chicken, I always feel like pulling my hair out. Because I sort of think, well, no one is going to force anyone to buy chlorinated chicken if it's ever on sale in Tesco or Sainsbury's or Waitrose or Lidl or wherever it is that you shop.
We buy
and actually buy chlorinated lettuce, exactly. Exactly. So
Meat
we
is
already
worse than
buy these
lettuce,
sorts of
Albie,
things.
let's be honest.
So it drives me insane when we have this whole conversation about chlorinated chicken. It holds up a trade deal with the biggest economy in the world, and then we're sat here wondering why we're not getting economic growth, and the Labour Party don't seem to care at all.
So may I just interject, if you don't mind, Albie? How does that connect fully in terms of this kind of the fact that we wanted to lead with sovereignty in terms of Brexit? We want to be our own boss. We want to have our own autonomy. We want to make our own laws. We want to kind of make our own mark on the global stage. And yet I listen to you as a Conservative saying, well, we must make sure that the King is happy. We
I didn't
must
say
make
that. You said that.
No, I'm inferring.
You said that.
No, you didn't. I do apologise. That was not your words. I'm just ad-libbing here. This is what I've received as a result of listening to you.
Okay, let me be more clear.
Thank you.
What I was advocating for was lowering tariff barriers on international trade with the United States of America, which is of mutual benefit to the UK and the US. Yes. I wasn't saying we need to be capitulating. Free trade benefits us all.
But the point is that after Brexit, we can do that.
Exactly.
Right? If we
Are
were
you
still
sure, Ian?
I am sure, yeah.
Okay, that's silly.
But if we were still in the EU,
yes,
that wouldn't be our decision to make. I mean, we could be part of the decision, yes, but we wouldn't be able to make that decision.
But we still have to capitulate in terms of power dynamics. And I think that's what I'm ultimately referring to.
Why do you say capitulate?
Because...
Do you not understand how negotiations work?
So negotiations is equal. I'm saying capitulate as in you might think it's equal.
Negotiations are very rarely equal, are they?
Thank you. That's the point that I'm about to make, Ian. We think it's equal, but someone loses. Someone is at a disadvantage when we think about power dynamics. And when we think about us versus the US, we're at a disadvantage. So therefore, there will be many things.
That can be true, but it doesn't have to be true.
I agree.
I mean, if you think about the relationship between Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, for example, where he clearly held all the power, but she held most of the influence because she did have a big influence on him. So it's possible to influence a superpower. But then again, at times, he completely ignored her by invading Grenada and things like that.
Yes.
So there's never any consistency here. And that's what makes politics such fun, isn't it?
But then I agree. But then what if times are changing? And so therefore the goalpost moves. I'm going to leave it at that. But the goalpost moves. So therefore our perception and the way that I analyse these things
we will be
shift.
Looking at these goalposts a lot over the next few years, I suspect, certainly for the next 4. We'll take more of your calls in a minute to our panel, 0345 6060 973. It's 19 minutes past 8.
This is LBC.
You don't need an
Question with Iain Dale. Watch live on Global Player. This is LBC.
21 minutes past 8 on LBC. Imarn Ayton is with us, and Christopher Howarth, who's written a book called The Durian Pact, When Two Worlds Go to War. Now, it's a novel, it's a thriller. Do you want to give us a sort of 30-second elevator pitch?
Well, it's based on my time in politics from the point of view of a politician, and it involves a superpower, sort of China and Taiwan, and it involves in the sort of machinations within Westminster on what is exactly going to happen in the Far East and the UK's entanglement there.
I should send a copy to my friend in Taiwan, or maybe it might horrify him. I don't know. And we have Albie Amankona and Dan Tomlinson, who's Labour MP for Chipping Barnet. Right, let's go to our next question. It is from Robin in Goole. He says, is Starmer's big EU reset about resetting things back to 2016? Now, on Friday, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, Dame Priti Patel, marked the 5th anniversary of Britain leaving the EU by accusing the government of being determined to dismantle Brexit and drag us back into the EU's grasp, vowing that the Conservatives will not allow this betrayal to happen. Christopher Howarth, do you really, you used to work for Priti Patel, do you really think that is what Keir Starmer's agenda is?
Well, Keir Starmer obviously never wanted to leave the EU, and as a lot in his party would dearly like to rejoin it. We have a comprehensive free trade agreement with the EU, and it's very unclear what this whole sort of reset is. There's a sort of lots of signalling about wanting to go closer to the EU without sort of defining what the UK wants. So this does raise suspicions as to whether this is part of a process to eventually rejoin the EU.
But it is in Britain's interest to have good relations with the EU, isn't it?
Yes, and we do have good relations. We have a free trade agreement, but
it's a pretty ropey one, isn't it? It's not the sort of, it isn't actually guaranteeing free trade in all sectors.
Well, it's zero tariffs in
a huge
all
amount more
sectors.
Bureaucracy.
Well, if you're either in a customs union or you're in a free trade agreement. If you're in a free trade agreement, you can then strike deals around the world. If you're in a customs union, you're in their club and they control your trade. So we're not in that. We control our own trade, but we have a comprehensive agreement, zero tariffs, and agreements in other areas. But beyond that, what is it? There are trade-offs. What is it exactly the government wants? I mean, we talk about youth mobility, sort of reopening free movement of people. Is that why is that exactly in the UK's interests? Or
because it would allow British 18 to 30-year-olds to go and live and work in EU countries as well.
As we saw in the past, the numbers will be massively inward bound into the UK, and then they add on things like subsidised places in universities. The French want fish. They want us to pay for defence and be meshed into their defence things. I mean, if you go into a negotiation, you need to be specific as to what's in our interests rather than just ask the EU what they'll give us. Because if you ask them, they'll come up with a big long wish list and they repackage it as these are the UK wants.
But Brexiteer to Brexiteer, are you honestly happy with the trade deal that we have, and you feel that the Brexit that we've had has been a roaring success and everything that the three of us dreamed of back in 2016?
Well, there are problems. I mean, the Northern Ireland Protocol would be the thing I would try and remove. Obviously, that's very difficult to do. I don't think youth mobility schemes or going into structured cooperation on defence, I don't think these are things we need to do. We are a big defence power. We can cooperate with the EU, we can cooperate with America, we can cooperate with NATO. We don't really need that.
So you're happy with Brexit and how it's gone or not?
Yes, on the whole, yes.
You are? I'm very disappointed, actually, with how Brexit has gone.
What did you want?
Well, I believed politicians and people who were persuading other people to vote for leave back in 2016 when they said we would get higher economic growth. I believed politicians when they said immigration would come down. I believed politicians when they said we'd have regulatory divergence from the European Union.
I didn't believe a word of the immigration argument. I remember saying on this programme in 2016, anyone that votes for Brexit thinking that immigration will come down is deluding themselves.
See, you're making me feel so naive, Ian, because I believed in what Albie said. I thought they were really going to come through with the immigration and they let us all down. So clearly,
How did you vote in the referendum?
Stay, of course.
Well, there's no of course.
No, of course. No, you're right. I corrected myself. There's no of course. There's no of course. But yeah, if you ever meet me, it's and of course. But yes, I was. I didn't want to interrupt Albie. I was just wanting to please finish your point.
I finished the point. The point is just that I'm disappointed with how Brexit has gone, and to hear someone essentially say, "Oh, they're perfectly happy with how Brexit has gone," I find it a bit difficult to believe.
Made domestic mistakes, that's for sure. But we've had high economic growth. If you look at Germany and France, these aren't if being a member of the EU made you an economic success.
I don't think that at all. But I think we should be closer to American levels of growth rather than EU levels of growth now that we've left.
But we should have taken charge of more of the opportunities.
The fact is that politicians from successive governments, from Theresa May right through to Rishi Sunak, failed in their duty to deliver what Albie and I voted for. That's what they completely failed.
I mean, I spent a lot of time in Parliament trying to stop the worst of what they were going to do with Brexit, staying in the customs union and the common rule book and checkers and all of that, which would have meant being in the EU but not actually being in the EU. So all the joint decisions just not being at the table. We avoided that except for Northern Ireland. But you're right, we didn't take all the opportunities that we should have done.
I mean, the fact is that our rule book now, the laws that we are all operating under are almost identical to the ones that when we were there when we were in the EU. And Conservative governments, since we left, have had 5 years or 4.5 years to get rid of a lot of these laws, and they haven't done it.
I'll meet you halfway on that one. I mean, there are areas, gene editing, that's a big industry. We've diverged.
They talk about nothing else down the dog and dark.
Well, these are important things. It's where economic growth comes from. Artificial intelligence, we can do our own course, and things, the Edinburgh reforms, financial services, we've gone our own course, which has freed up a lot of money to invest. So I mean, there are things we've done differently. We banned the live export of animals, if that is something that's or the import of fur and various other things we couldn't do beforehand. VAT we've changed. I mean, there are things we should have done a lot more.
But those are important things.
Yeah, they're important for sectors of people, and they do add up to something.
Okay,
we should have done more.
So I just think... So I did say I voted to stay. I think we've made our bed, so we should just lie in it. I think we should just kind of accept how people feel and kind of strengthen up and problem solve as a result moving forward. I totally agree. There were many things that this government, or rather the last government, let us down with, but they have kind of stuck to the line of we get to make our own laws. And I'm pretty sure I think his name was Andrew Griffin, the Shadow.
Yeah.
Thank you.
In fact, he's on the programme tomorrow.
Oh,
Griffith.
Lovely. Okay, Griffith. Almost there. Andrew Griffith. Excellent. I'm pretty sure he said that because we have now left the EU, we get to make our own laws, and that includes aspects of the online safety bill, for example. I'm pretty sure I heard him say that. So I agree that... I think what I'm trying to say is, going back to the original point I was saying to Albie earlier, in terms of just, if we're going to lead with sovereignty, just lead with sovereignty. Let's lead with leadership, and let's just own it and problem solve. And that's where we're at right now. Things have gone wrong. Fair. Wealth, economic growth, not so much. Lower immigration, not so much. But do we have the ability to make our own rules? And yes, albeit we have to play ball with our neighbours.
And
I appreciate
in the end,
that.
that's up to us, isn't it?
Yes,
Dan.
precisely.
So the original question was whether we're planning on taking the UK back to 2016. And I think, and the quote you mentioned as well, was it from the Shadow Foreign Secretary? I think that the Tories want to play the old tunes, which is the tunes from the Labour Party from years of old, that was trying to, see if we could have a different path than Brexit. But we were really clear in the manifesto. We've been really clear since. We're not going anywhere near the single market, rejoining the EU or the customs union. We understand that people voted for change. And I really agree with a lot of what you were saying, Albie, in terms of, I think people did think that migration would come down. To see net almost 1 million people come the year before last, and I think around 700,000 last year, we need to bring those numbers down. That's totally right. And we do have the ability to do that. We can take control of our laws when it comes to migration. And then there are some specific things. The Prime Minister today was talking about defence and security, where we think we can deepen the partnership there. We said in the manifesto that we wanted to make it easier for people who wanted to transport livestock with a veterinary agreement. Sounds small, but we committed to it, and so I hope that we can make progress and get a deal on that too. And there are other things like the musicians that try and tour, between the UK and the EU who find that they're gummed up with paperwork. If you're trying to take an orchestra from the UK into the EU and every single one of them has to fill in reams and reams of paperwork.
But I think that's where you have to then get agreements with individual countries. It's not at EU level. I don't really understand the technicals of this, but it has been a running sore.
Yeah, and these are the sorts of issues that I hope a reset, which is at the moment primarily about tone. There's not a big thing that we're saying we want this tomorrow and we're going to have this negotiation.
Started under Rishi Sunak, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. Though the problem he had, and the problem that so many Tories have had over decades, as we'll all know, is that the Conservative Party is sort of riven with disagreement on the EU. We've got a lot of unity in the Labour Party now that we're not going to go all the way back in. We don't want to go near that. We don't want to reopen those big questions, but we do want to make the relationship more productive. And I think there might be people who are listening to me thinking, you all just want to go back in. We know what you're like. But I think people should understand that there are something like 200 new MPs in Parliament. Maybe over 100 were elected in those so-called red wall seats. They've been out knocking on doors, speaking to their constituents and the people who they're asking to vote for them. And we know that people don't want this big black box reopen, not least when we've got to focus on the economy and getting growth up. And it just leads to so much instability if we reopen that big picture question right now.
Quickly.
Thank you. I'm pretty sure that polling said, I'm pretty sure the recent polling said that 55% of people regret the fact that we delved into Brexit. They regret their decision. So that isn't 100% accurate. If you just want,
I think that people might regret their decision if that's what the polling shows.
55% of YouGov. I'm pretty sure it's a YouGov poll.
Was,
yes, thank you.
If you then take that a step further with people and say, okay, would you like a referendum on coming back into the EU and our politics to be upended by a never-ending debate about all of these issues once again and have that happen now? I think people would say, hold off.
If you put the question in that rather biased way, yes.
we've got a load of problems in this country and we need to work on fixing them. And that's what this government's trying to do.
Right, well, we will come to some of those problems in just a few moments' time. It's 8:33, time for the news headlines on LBC with Daryl Jackson.
The Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, says his heart goes out to the family of a 15-year-old boy who was stabbed to death at a school in Sheffield. A 15-year-old boy has been arrested on suspicion of murder after the incident at All Saints Catholic High School. A schoolgirl who stabbed 2 teachers and a fellow pupil in Carmarthenshire has been found guilty of attempted murder. All 3 victims were hospitalised following the attack last April. US President Donald Trump has agreed to pause tariffs on Mexico for a month to allow time for further discussions. His levies against Canada and China are still due to take effect tomorrow. LBC weather: rain for Northern Ireland and Western Wales tonight, dry in the south and east and a low of 3 degrees.
This is LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
With us on the panel, Dan Tomlinson, Labour MP for Chipping Barnet, Christopher Howarth. He is. Do you want to be known as the author, or
yes, why not?
the author of the Durian Pact? When two worlds go to war, watch it shoot up. Watch it shoot up. The Amazon charts as a result of all of these mentions. I'm going to put it on my online bookshop when I get home. Albie Amankona is here, Chief Executive and Co-founder of the campaign group. With, I always think, the awkward name of Conservatives Against Racism.
Also, no one uses that title for me anymore. I think it's been.
What is it?
You can just call me political commentator, conservative commentator, or vice chair of the LGBT plus Conservatives. Is probably the most
just all-round good guy.
Yeah.
And Imarn Ayton is an anti-racism activist and writer. What form does your anti-racism activism take?
Oh, teaching. Always teaching. You need to educate. There isn't anything else. I think anything else that doesn't include teaching is nothing but ego and just ignorance, in all fairness. I'm going to be brutally honest when I say that about anti-racism. So it's all about teaching. And you have to be accurate and know what the hell it is that you're talking about when you teach. So yes, teaching.
OK. Right, let's move on to Sammy in Canterbury. Sammy, what would you like to ask?
Hi, thank you. So given a recent poll has just had Reform ahead of Labour in the in a YouGov recent poll, I was going to ask, is that how does Labour basically take the fight to reform, and how do they basically go from there onward? How does Labour basically fight reform? Yeah, that's...
OK. Well, a new poll out today from YouGov for Sky News has put reform on top for the first time. Nigel Farage's party has 24%. I think it's 25%. It says 24% on my screen, but I think it's 25%. Labour 24%, and the Conservatives on 21%. Let's widen this out to make it more fun and include the Conservatives in how they fight reform as well. But Dan, let's start with you.
It's a good question, and I think it should start with an understanding of why people are saying they might vote reform and why people did. My constituency in North London, 8% of people voted for reform. We know in some other constituencies that Labour gained from the Tories. You see reform in the last election up at 15, 20, maybe even higher.
And did you win your seat because of the reform vote? I mean, obviously due to your personal charisma.
I think I would have squeaked past if it weren't for reform, because I don't think that all of the reform voters were Tories. I think some came from Labour too. So I think, first of all, we have to understand as a party, as a government, that lots of people voted for reform because they had had enough. They had seen what the previous government did when it comes to migration, which we've just been talking about, with the state of the public services and the state of the economy. And maybe they weren't fully convinced that Labour would deliver change if they voted for us, for whatever reason. And so they voted for reform as a protest. And so really, I think it is incumbent on us now as a government to show again that politics can make a difference. And so people...
How's that going so far?
Well, so people might want to criticise these milestones that the Prime Minister set out, higher living standards for families across the country, building 1.5 million new homes, getting NHS waiting lists down, 13,000 new police across the country. People have said whatever they want about those milestones. But I think when I go out and knock on doors in my constituency, as I do almost every weekend, people want to see those things change. People feel like the cost of living is making their life very difficult, and they want to see that improve. I had a big meeting in my constituency on Monday this week about crime, people not seeing police on the street anymore. And I was able to say to them, well, since we've started to invest in this and asked the Met in London to focus on it, the number of local police in your ward has increased from 1 to 3. And that sounds small. People may scoff at that. But actually, that's a real tangible change for people on their streets. And that's the sort of thing that I think this government needs to do. Secondly, and I won't go on too long, I promise, Ian, as well as deliver, we have to not be afraid to take on reform. So Nigel Farage has been saying that he's open to anything when it comes to funding for the NHS and has talked about an insurance-based model. I don't think people want to see an additional tax or insurance burden placed on them in order to fund the NHS. I think people know that it's difficult, that the government's got to do lots of hard work to reform the NHS, but we have a model that works, and that if we have a good government that can turn things around, we can build the NHS that's fit for the future for the long term. I wouldn't want to go anywhere near a Nigel Farage plan for the NHS, and I think we have to be making clear that they would be taking the country in a direction that maybe people don't quite assume when they think about voting reform.
Just one question before I move on to the rest of the panel. Do you not think, though, that, I mean, I wrote a piece for the newspaper a few months ago about a pathway to Nigel Farage becoming Prime Minister. I said, look, there's only a 10% chance of this happening, probably less than that. But it's not beyond the realms of possibility that if the Tories continue to implode, say they get rid of Kemi Badenoch, have a couple more leaders, people don't take them seriously at the next election, if you don't deliver on growth, if you don't deliver on the NHS, if you don't deliver on X, Y, Z, then there will be a huge number of people in the country, ex-Tory, ex-Labour voters, who think, well, we've heard it from the two main parties, let's give this other lot a chance. Now, that is a real fear for you, surely.
We are the last line of defence against a politics that I don't think would be any good for our country, and we know that as Labour MPs. That's why we've seen actually, I think, a very united parliamentary Labour Party around the decisions that the government are making. You know, the vast, vast majority of the Labour MPs in Parliament know that these issues that we've identified, that the Prime Minister is pushing on, we have to make a difference on them, because if we don't, who knows where people will turn. And just one more thing to say, we know as well that the electorate in this country are not loyal like they used to be. I believe in the last election, something like half of people changed their vote between 2019 and the one before. That's massive. It used to be that almost everyone either voted Labour or Tory. Yeah. So I think we can expect the polls in this Parliament to go up and down, and we've got to make sure in 4 years' time people can see that we've made progress for them and their lives.
Imarn.
I think Labour have lost the plot. They're not quite understanding the nuance that people are really desperate for. So if I just kind of talk about how I feel about reform, devoid of my emotions, right? So let's ignore the emotions, all the things that you would typically expect me to say as a black woman who is a centrist or left centre. Nigel Farage.
There are black women who vote reform.
I know, but it's more about how people perceive me. So if I'm honest, I know that a lot of people don't necessarily, they've put me in a category, which is Black Lives Matter. So people don't want me to get out of that box. So that's why I always have to give the disclaimer. But if I think about reform, main thing, leadership, really strong leadership. Nigel Farage is incredibly unapologetic and strong as a leader. Unapologetic. He comes across unauthentic. He is unscripted. I remember watching him during the campaign and he didn't have a script. You remember when he did you know what I'm talking about, when he did the campaign ready to debate, you know, thank you for giving me the words, Ian.
But you said he was inauthentic. I think most people see him as authentic.
No, that's what I said. Sorry, I do apologise. Strength, authentic, excellent communicator. These things I think Labour take for granted. I also think that reform have hit the nail on the head in terms of appealing to people's pride and patriotism. That's not what Labour has done. That's not what Conservative has done. And I would actually argue that most people that care and love their country, whether it be nationality or their ethnicity, it's all about pride and patriotism. Who's got that reform? Allow me to just finish. Then they have a capitalistic mindset, which is actually quite inspiring because it's centred around money, power, and growth. And so that in and of itself is quite inspiring. And last but not least, you've got Nigel Farage with his excellent communication skills, the fact that he's very strong, unapologetic, unscripted, and has influence with America. So these four things Labour cannot compete with, Dan.
I think that one of the reasons why we got a large majority at the last election, there are many reasons, but one, including the collapse of the Tories, one of them is that we were unapologetic in our patriotism and our support for this country.
Oh, I must have missed that.
Every single leaflet that, you know, we put out in the national campaign, we had the Union flag on there, and we were being clear that actually politics
so just putting a flag on a leaflet means nothing.
No, of course, but hey, one of the challenges the Labour Party had in the past is that they didn't want to be associated with the flag. We've been very clear that we want to see this country succeed. We want to see the people in this country succeed once again.
But do you convey that? Do you actually feel that your leader, Keir Starmer, conveys that? He's an inspiring leader who inspires and motivates people. Can you honestly say that if you compare Kemi, Nigel, Keir and Trump.
I think
who are the best communicators, who are the most inspirational, who are the strongest leaders. Keir is not one of them, with all due respect.
I think that every single week so far, Keir has bested Kemi in PMQs, which is the one time.
But you would say that, wouldn't you?
Would you disagree? Would you disagree then?
Yes, I would disagree. I think there are some weeks
What was the
Kemi has
week
done
where
well.
Kemi really won?
I think there are some. I think there are some weeks that Keir has done very well. I'm not going to sit here and say I think Kemi's beaten Keir every single week, because I don't think she has. I don't think Keir has beaten Kemi every single week. I think if you want to compare someone like Nigel Farage to Keir Starmer, I think we can probably all say objectively that Nigel Farage is the better communicator than both Kemi Badenoch, who's my party leader, and Keir Starmer, who's your party leader. Everything Imarn said about Nigel Farage just there is totally right.
Thank you, and that's devoid of my emotion, because Albie, I don't want people to be confused. I don't like him,
and
but devoid of emotion.
Both the Conservatives and Labour, I think, at the next election, have a real problem on their hands with Nigel Farage, because he's almost reached a point in the polls that no other third party has ever reached, where he's actually besting the two main parties.
Well, let me correct you there. The SDP Liberal Alliance did in the 1980s. They got to 27%, but that still wasn't enough for a parliamentary breakthrough.
But, can I just go back? People said before the general election, they said, oh, Keir Starmer, he doesn't have the, amazing rhetoric. He's not the most inspiring politician.
No.
And the public looked at him and saw a serious man who was focused on what we needed to change in this country.
What are his approval ratings right now?
Trusted him with our national security, trusted him on the economy, and we got the largest majority since Tony Blair, the biggest gain in Labour seats we've ever seen.
You only got 33.7% of the vote, and if that doesn't worry you, it really should.
But we should also be clear that one of the things that Keir did incredibly well over his time in leader, as leader of the opposition, was turn us from a party where people would have been scared to vote for anyone else other than the Tories to keep us out. To think, you know what, maybe I can vote over her over there because I trust Labour, because I'm not scared of Labour.
Well, I stood for election in 2019 in Bridget Phillipson's constituency in County Durham in Sunderland, and 3,115 votes, and it would have been a different result. There were 6,000 Brexit Party votes and 1,000 UKIP votes. And you could feel it has been in the Labour Party's gift for a very long time, and you could feel they wanted to change. And this was the opportunity Boris Johnson had, and he took it. And then, sadly, it got squandered.
Frittered it away.
Over a number sort of high energy costs, net zero, mass immigration. This wasn't what people voted for. So this sort of potential coalition, sort of reconnecting the Conservatives into sort of small C cultural values in places like Sunderland, the Red Wall, that's sort of gone. And you see now in the same area, it's now Reform is now the number 2 party and the Conservatives are third. So it's the same story. The centre-right could win in all of these areas, but now Reform is the biggest party. And that's the problem the Conservatives are left in, because if the Reform Party are coming second to Labour, the centre-right vote will vote Reform. So that was the opportunity that was frittered away. So I think for the Conservatives, it is the bar on them getting back into power, and it is a threat, obviously, to the Labour Party in these seats they won back this time round.
Well, we could talk about this for the rest of the hour, but we've got other questions we want to come to, so let's take a quick break and we'll come back to them. It's 8:49.
This is LBC.
I've got a new
Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
We're with Dan Tomlinson, Christopher Howarth, Imarn Ayton and Albie Amankona. WhatsApp question from Vaz in Warwick. A new book has revealed that Keir Starmer took voice coaching lessons in the winter of 2020 to help him connect with voters. Should he ask for a refund? And more seriously, will Voice Coach Gate be as consequential for him as Partygate was for Boris Johnson? I think that's a bit of a stretch. The journalists Patrick Maguire and Gabriel Pogren's new book, Get In, The Inside Story of Labour Under Starmer, has revealed that the actress and voice coach Leonie Mellinger was employed to give the leader of the opposition, as he then was, voice coaching sessions in December of 2020. The Prime Minister was asked today if he'd broken any COVID rules in inviting Miss Mellinger to Labour's headquarters, but he insisted that all rules were followed as you'd expect. So that's the COVID connection. OK, Christopher Howarth.
Well, I mean, if the Prime Minister gives his word on something, I'm not going to second guess that if he says he didn't break any rules.
I used to say that about Tony Blair.
But it does look a bit fishy.
Iman?
Oh, two parts. So coaching-wise, no, I just think he should fire the original coach and then get a new coach. That's my personal opinion. He should keep on the same trajectory. He needs it, but just get a different coach. And in terms of kind of Partygate, COVID, I think he got away with that one, personally. I feel like we were so centred around Boris. And I remember that picture of him with the beer in the window, and I just thought, why does that look any different to Boris and his party? To me,
well,
personally,
the police found that it was different.
Well,
I know. That's the interesting part, right?
I don't think he got away with it.
I'll put it a different way. Police said it was different. I accept that. Police also said that he didn't break the rules, Boris did. I accept that. Based off of an image, the image that I saw of Boris and the image that I saw of Keir Starmer with the beer in the window, to me it's the same thing. Okay. That's just my personal opinion.
Albie?
You got away with it.
I think if we were talking about a Tory that had invited a voice coach to CCHQ in the middle of the pandemic, I think we'd be having a very different conversation about it. And I don't think many people would be rushing to defend whichever Tory it was that did that. So I do think there just seems to be a lower bar when it comes to Keir Starmer and the Labour Party and these sorts of things. On the question about whether or not he needs a voice coach, yeah, absolutely does need a voice coach. I think the other one clearly has not been that effective. Do you have a voice coach that you can perhaps recommend to Keir? Because you're quite good. Whereas
You're very good, Dan. You need to be sharing.
Maybe you should.
I'm way too junior to be anywhere near
at the moment
any sort of thing like that. Look, I think the Prime Minister's been clear today, as Christopher said, that no rules were broken. I think if you look at the rules at the time...
How many times did Boris say that?
If you look at the rules at the time, it was clear that people who had reasons to be in person, in work, that was totally within the rules. And I think... I don't know the ins and outs of precisely what happened, so I'm not going to... But I think it was totally legitimate for people to be doing work that wasn't from home if they needed to be in person.
Can I just say one thing? I just think one looked more fun and one looked really boring. And if we really think about how we're going right now in terms of how we perceive Keir Starmer, it actually makes sense. Even if that could have been the same dynamic as a gathering, because remember Boris technically said it wasn't like a full-blown party type vibe, I would say that
no cake was consumed.
But this is a different issue. This is the thing, is that
was the term.
Whoever, I can't, there's a Tory MP today has sent a letter to Keir about this. I think these opposition Tory MPs spend a bit less time writing letters with questions that they
Did
know
you say
they're
that to
not going
Chris
to get an
Bryant
answer
when
to.
he was doing the same thing when he was in opposition?
Well, I was just a charity worker back then, and I don't think I'd have got involved in telling MPs
thing as just a charity worker.
Thank you. I used to work in charity. Don't you dare say that again in your life, Dan.
Right, let's move on to... Sorry, this question was so long it's dominating my screen. Dave says, now somebody scrolled it back down again. I can't read it. Can someone scroll it up? There we go. Some councils will be putting up council tax by 10% in April. How can this be acceptable when public services are so poor? Now, 6 cash-strapped local authorities across England have been allowed by the Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner, to increase their council tax by 10% from April. Now, if you could each restrict your answers to 45 seconds, I would be grateful. Albie.
The main thing that council tax is spent on is social care. A lot of that social care is for elderly people. If you don't want to raise council tax, how do you want to pay for those elderly people's social care? I don't like seeing taxes go up, but it seems like an insolvable problem.
Dan?
I think what you just said, Albie, is very true. If I think of the council in Barnet, the big cost pressures are coming from adult social care, they're coming from special educational needs, and they're coming from temporary accommodation, where it's now the case that 1 in 22 children in London live in temporary accommodation. These pressures are just going up and up and up. And at the moment, the system that we've got, when councils have these additional pressures, yes, the government's putting lots of money in. I believe the increase is 4% above inflation this year for local authorities on average across the country, one of the biggest uplifts they've seen in a long time, after their budgets have been cut by something like a fifth under the previous government. It will still be the case that some councils need to increase council tax. My understanding, from what I've read today, is that these councils that are having an increase of above the 5%, they will still have lower than average council tax for the people living in that area.
Christopher?
Well, I think you both touched on local government finance is a complete mess. Most of their spending is dictated from the centre, and most of the spending gets spent on a small number of people. For most people in an area, it's bins and potholes are the things they see the local government deliver. Hence, they become such big political issues. So I think 10%, we've had a lot of inflation. What we really need is a kind of a reorganisation of local government finance. Maybe make it more democratic so local politicians can decide the priorities. But at the moment, they're basically told what to spend it on. Same with planning. They're told...
Imarn?
I know. They haven't got a leg to stand on. I think they're investing 25.7 billion into the NHS. 600 million is going into social care. In terms of housing, 5 billion. So what do you mean? You've got 600 million for social care. You've got 5 billion for housing. Why do you need to allow councils to raise and
we're going to leave
make
that
it
question
worse
hanging
for the average
because we're
working
rapidly
class
running
person?
out of
That's
time.
okay.
So let's go to our fun question from Carl in Newark. A pub landlady from Nottingham has admitted she lost £1,500 on Saturday after she promised on social media free pint when Forest score before Nottingham Forest beat Brighton 7-0. Which promise have you made and then quickly regretted? Dan?
I assured my family last year that we would get a holiday in the summer because the Prime Minister would definitely not call the election until November. That didn't quite go to plan. I spent all summer recruiting a team, setting up an office, being an MP. So it was, they were understanding, but that promise was broken.
But this year, you're taking them all on the most expensive holiday they've ever been on.
I think we're going to the Highlands this year on a road trip.
Do they feel a bit let down by that? Nothing wrong with the Highlands.
Very exciting, very beautiful.
Okay. Albie?
I made a bet in 2016 that Donald Trump wouldn't win the US election, and then he did win, so I had to give my friend £100, so I regretted that.
Okay. Imarn?
Mine's a bit more serious. I promised myself that I would lead in regards to kind of... the views or ideologies of those that perceive themselves as left-wing. And then I quickly realised that many people on the left had just gone crazy, so I kind of...
Why are you looking at Dan when you say that?
No, it's because I'm actually looking at Albie, because I feel like I'm getting closer to Albie and people don't know what to do with me. People don't know what to do with me. It's like, come on, what's happening here?
Christopher?
In 2016, I volunteered I said I'd do a hustings for the EU referendum, and I was told, went up to North London, quite close to your constituency. Going into the room, I realised it was far bigger than I ever thought it was going to be, several hundred people. I realised it was a bit of a hanging audience. So it was sort of big the one person advocating leave. It calmed down a bit after a while. But
we're very lovely in North London, I'm sure.
Well,
very nice.
Brian says, Ian, best ever cross question, simply the best. So take that as a compliment, particularly as we've got 3 debutants on the panel.
And one newbie.
Thank you all very much indeed. Tomorrow's panel includes the Conservative Shadow Business Secretary, Andrew Griffith, the Times columnist, Sebastian Payne, and Miqdad Versi from the Muslim Council of Britain. So that's tomorrow from 8 o'clock on LBC. Now, in shocking news tonight, Scotland will not ban cats. I can hear cheers reverberating around the United Kingdom. That was confirmed by the Scottish First Minister after animal experts suggested restrictions on their movements should be considered in some areas. The Scottish Animal Welfare Commission, which advises ministers on animal welfare in Scotland, had urged them to look further into the pros and cons of compulsory containment of cats in certain parts of Scotland. Well, obviously that's not going to happen, quite right too. But what kinds of responsibilities should pet owners have for the actions of their pets? Over to you, 0345 6060 973. That is the number to call.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, a 15-year-old boy has been stabbed to death at a school in Sheffield while another